I'm going to open with a quick thought from Proverbs chapter 13, verses 13 through 16. Whoso despiseth the word shall be destroyed, but he that feareth the commandment shall be rewarded. The law of the wise is a fountain of life, to depart from the snares of death. Good understanding giveth favor, but the way of transgressors is hard. Every prudent man dealeth with knowledge, but a fool layeth open his folly. As we consider the topic for tonight, we will operate upon the premise that the Bible, the Holy Scriptures, are indeed the inspired Word and are the only thing that we need to follow to direct us in this life and in the way to heaven. And that we are not to add or take away from His Word, and we are not to turn to the right or to the left of His instruction. We also know that God does not change, and that He is not the author of confusion. We live in changing times, changing cultures. We all have different personalities and opinions and preferences that may not always be congruent with one another. And there are situations in which there may be multiple ways to accomplish or implement the divine and heavenly will. Situations like this may require the employment of what I have sometimes heard other Christians refer to as expediency, in order to navigate a divinely approved path forward. And when you first think about this word expediency, maybe some of you have heard of this concept. I have heard it a few times, and maybe you haven't. In the modern language, our English language, expedient is more of a convenient and practical type of definition. It essentially means it's a means to an end, and it can come with immoral or improper connotations. So as a matter of convenience, you might find the most expedient path forward, whether it's strictly in adherence with laws or regulations or policy, for example. In your Bibles, you will not see the word expedient very often. The NIV and the NASB, New American Standard, I didn't see it at all. I think the ESV has it one time. King James Version uses that word 7, and American Standard uses it 8. Well, you can see other adjectives, words like helpful, of benefit, beneficial, advantageous. Those are other words that you might see in place of expedient in your versions. However, the Greek definition of expedient is quite different. It is pronounced, I believe, samphero. Technically, some meaning with, and phero to bring. It literally means to bring together. In the intransitive sense, it also, and in that I mean not directly at a particular object per se, it also means to be an advantage or profitable. And so when associated with a noun, you will also see the word profitable for this word. So with that in mind, we'll take a look at a passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And it's good to note that, as I mentioned, the times that change, we have cultures that change over time. Well, the Corinthians, they lived in the city of Corinth, and some scholars have estimated the population of that city to be in the whereabouts of maybe 650,000 people. So not as large as our biggest cities, but definitely a good-sized city. They also had about a dozen different Greek gods that they worshiped there, including Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And they had a temple there that was serviced by somewhere around 1,000 prostitutes. And so just to get a picture, to Corinthianize was a term that has been used to describe the sensual and the lascivious nature of a society. And so the Corinthians and the Corinthian church were exposed to just about as much as we are exposed today in many ways. So they're not at all unlike what you might think of in modern day society. Starting 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 23. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. Whatsoever is sold in the shambles, or you may have the word markets, that eat, asking no questions for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and you be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no questions for conscience sake. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the others. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? For if I by grace be a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that for which I give thanks? Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. Give none offense, neither to the Jews, nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God. Even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. We see an example here of the eating of meat that was bought from a market that may have been sacrificed to idols. And what is described here is that, of course, if you go and buy meat from the market, it is simply that. It is meat, it is of the earth, and God made it, it is good. But if it's recognized that that meat was sacrificed to idols, maybe that could offend somebody. Maybe somebody feels that that is a wrong thing. And if it's brought up, then the direction here, the advice that's given to us by the Apostle Paul, is that we should not eat that. For somebody who staunchly believes against it, it could cause them offense. For somebody who might be on the fence, maybe they aren't quite sure if it's okay or not, you might be swaying them to believe that it is okay, and then further create a division that might already have started with somebody else. If you're not a believer and it's recognized that you're eating meat from idols, they might think that you condone sacrifices to idols. And so this is where we see a matter of expediency. There are things that are okay, such as eating meat, whether it was sacrificed to idols or not. For our own conscience, we know that that is okay. But it might not be okay in somebody else's eyes. And so we have multiple ways in this situation to accomplish the divine will or authority that's given us, depending on the circumstance. But note that in verse 23, at the end of it, it says, "But all things edify not." So maybe it is okay to eat meat, but it may not be edifying. Verse 29, "Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the others." Our focus should be on other people, not just ourselves. If you go back a couple of chapters, chapter 8, verse 9, we can see the principle of not becoming a stumbling block to somebody. And of course, all things in verse 23 does not literally mean that all things are lawful. We see in chapter 9, verse 21, just the previous chapter, that we are not to compromise the law to God under Christ. And of course, that is a big difference in the word expedient in the Greek versus the word expedient in modern day language. And if you go a few chapters further back to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, starting in verse 12, you'll see a very similar type of situation with the eating of meat. But if you read through to verse 20, you will also see that we are members of Christ. We are literally members of Him, and that our bodies are a temple, and that we were bought with a price. And that comes with the responsibility of thinking about others. So when we think about the application of what we read here, there may be areas in our lives, whether it's in our personal lives or as part of the running of a congregation or leadership in a church, there may be areas where the Bible is not exactly explicit. However, where something is not necessarily explicitly stated, we most oftentimes, as we see here, we can find principles such as expediency that may be utilized. And we can find scriptural examples such as where we see here the eating of meat that may have been sacrificed to idols. And we can find those examples, we can draw upon them to ensure that we diligently keep each other's souls and that we implement God's will for us as individuals, as well as a body of Christians, as part of Christ's body. In order to be successful at being expedient, we need to communicate. And that is one of the biggest things I see at work when something goes wrong. It's usually a drop in communication. Who knows, it might be fear, or maybe our lack of confidence, maybe there's some pride or some trust issues. All of these things can heed our ability to communicate with each other and to come to consensus on the things that might be most expedient. But let us also remember that as a body, we are a family, and we have a responsibility to hold fast to that truth, to the hope, and to the written word, the Holy Scriptures. And wherever we may find trouble, we can be assured that whatever the situation is, there is going to be a principle, there will be an example that we can draw upon from the record that can help us. There is nothing new under the sun. And if we hold fast and keep to that, and we sincerely care for ourselves and for each other, we will continue to grow, we will continue to succeed, we will continue to implement the divine will upon this earth. It is a very encouraging thought. There is a lot of hope to be found in that, and I hope that you are also encouraged. If there's anybody that has any needs, Any prayers that may need to be asked for, please come forward as we stand and sing.